A CEO walks into his shiny corporate lobby and laughs at the single dad janitor humming in Russian to his little girl on a video call. It was meant to be a joke, but by the end of the week, that same janitor would hold the key to saving the CEO's entire company. When an international crisis explodes in the middle of a high-stakes deal, the man everyone overlooked suddenly becomes the only one who can speak the language literally. Yet, behind the boardroom doors, another truth is waiting to detonate. A secret child, a past the CEO can't outrun, and a $340 million contract hanging by a thread. How did a man with a mop become the most powerful voice in the room? And when the deal and two families are on the line, who will stand for him when the world turns against him? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The early morning light filtered through the lobby's towering windows, casting long shadows across the freshly buffed marble floor. Alexei Morozov guided his floor buffer in smooth, practiced circles, his phone propped carefully on a nearby ledge. On the screen, his daughter Nadia's small face beamed as her fingers worked carefully with a sheet of paper. "Papa, look, this one will be blue, like the sky," she said, folding the homework paper with careful precision. "Beautiful, my little bird," Alexei replied softly, a smile warming his tired features. Without thinking, he began humming an old Russian lullaby his mother had sung to him, the familiar melody bringing comfort to both father and daughter across the digital divide. The click of expensive shoes on marble interrupted the peaceful moment. Franklin Harlan's commanding presence filled the lobby as he strode through the doors, flanked by three board members in crisp suits. Alexei kept working, maintaining his professional composure even as he heard the CEO's footsteps slow near his buffer. The Russian words of the lullaby still hung in the air when Harlan's voice cut through them like a knife. "Well, would you look at that? Mop and spy. At least he's good with a wet floor." Uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the small group of executives. Alexei's hands tightened slightly on the buffer's handle, but his movements remained steady, dignified. "Good morning, Mr. Harlan," Alexei said clearly in English, his accent present but his diction precise. He nodded respectfully to the group, then resumed his work. As the executives moved toward the elevator, Pearl Whitaker emerged from the chapel space where she volunteered as chaplain. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, sharp from decades of military nursing, had caught the entire exchange. She fixed Harlan with a look that could have frozen water, disappointment radiating from her tall, straight-backed frame. After the elevator doors closed on the executives, Pearl approached Alexei. "Hold your head high, son," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Alexei nodded gratefully. When Pearl moved away, he paused his work briefly, closing his eyes. "Lord," he whispered in English, "grant me patience. Help me remember that every person carries their own burdens." The lobby's silence was broken by the sharp tap of heels on marble. Marnie Cho, the company's chief legal officer, crossed the space with swift efficiency, a tablet tucked under her arm. She'd witnessed the CEO's comment from the security desk, where she'd been signing in a visitor. Her dark eyes narrowed slightly as she made a mental note. TPA checks signed S. Casual discrimination, even in jest, was a liability she'd need to monitor. Alexei finished his shift as the morning sun climbed higher, transforming the lobby into a cathedral of light and gleaming stone. He changed out of his work clothes in the small employee locker room, carefully hanging up his uniform. His fingers brushed the St. Michael medal Pearl had given him for courage months ago, and he tucked it safely in his pocket. Checking the day's schedule posted near the time clock, he noted the upcoming building-wide press tour scheduled for 2 hours later. The Russian Philanthropic Foundation's visit was clearly marked in bold letters. At the loading dock, the morning air still carried a hint of dawn's chill. A courier van had just arrived, and workers were carefully unloading wooden crates marked with Cyrillic letters. Alexei paused to exchange pleasantries with Sam, the elderly security guard who always worked the morning shift. "Beautiful day ahead." Sam commented, checking items off on his clipboard. Yes, Alexei agreed, in his careful English. Perfect for new beginnings. He wiped his hands on a clean rag and tucked Nadia's latest paper crane, her blue sky crane, into his shirt pocket, its delicate folds close to his heart. The distant ding of the elevator announced the start of the press tour. Alexei headed toward the back hall, his workday complete, but his impact on the day's events just beginning. The press tour had barely begun when disaster struck. Mrs. Vera Kovalenko, a distinguished representative from the Russian Foundation, suddenly wavered mid-sentence during her welcome speech. Her face drained of color, and she pressed a trembling hand to her chest. I feel... Nehorosho, she mumbled in Russian, her knees buckling. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Mrs. Kovalenko collapsed. Her husband, Boris, rushed forward with a cry of distress, but security held him back, creating more chaos. Camera flashes erupted and voices rose in panic. Alexei, who had been quietly cleaning windows nearby, dropped his cloth and sprinted toward the scene. He knelt beside Mrs. Kovalenko, his movements swift but gentle. Меня зовут Alexei, he introduced himself in flawless Russian, his voice calm and reassuring. I am trained in first aid. Please, let me help. Tell them possible cardiac event, female patient, late 60s. His fingers found her pulse as he loosened her silk scarf. Pulse is rapid, but steady. Keep everyone back, give her air. Boris Kovalenko struggled against the security officers. My wife, please, my Vera. Alexei looked up and addressed him in Russian. Sir, she is breathing. I will stay with her until help arrives. Please, let me help her. The elderly man's panic eased slightly at hearing his native language. Alexei continued speaking soothingly to both husband and wife, switching effortlessly between languages as needed. When paramedics arrived minutes later, Alexei provided precise translations of Mrs. Kovalenko's symptoms and medical history from her husband. His clear, professional manner kept the situation from descending into further chaos. As they prepared to load Mrs. Kovalenko onto the stretcher, Boris grabbed Alexei's hand. Please. He begged in Russian, a prayer. She always wants prayer when she's afraid. A local news camera had pushed to the front of the crowd, its red light blinking. Alexei didn't hesitate. He bowed his head and spoke a simple, heartfelt prayer in Russian, his voice gentle but carrying clearly through the hushed lobby. Lord, watch over Vera. Guide the hands of those who will care for her. Give peace to her husband's worried heart. Amen. Boris wiped his eyes and squeezed Alexei's shoulder before following the stretcher out. The lobby slowly emptied as the excitement died down, though the news crew lingered, capturing final footage of Alexei quietly returning to his window-cleaning duties. Hours later, in a sleek Moscow office, Anya Baranova watched the viral clip on her tablet. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. The janitor's immediate response, his seamless language skills, the natural authority that had calmed the crisis. But it was the prayer that held her attention. She replayed it twice, noting the genuine compassion in his voice. Interesting, she murmured to her assistant in Russian. A janitor with soul. Make a note, we'll want to remember him. Back at Harlan Dynamics, Frank's PR team was already strategizing damage control. Jessica Chen, his lead PR aide, cornered him in the executive suite. Sir, the morning's incident with the janitor hasn't aged well on social media, she began carefully. Especially given his heroic handling of the medical emergency, we should consider a public apology. Frank's jaw tightened. An apology? To the cleaning staff? We're thinking a photo opportunity. You shake his hand, express gratitude for his quick thinking. It would play well with the press, especially given the Russian connection. Absolutely not. Frank snapped, but Jessica persisted. Sir, the optics. Fine, he cut her off. Set it up. Make it quick. But when Jessica approached Alexei with the proposal, he surprised her with a gentle refusal. Thank you, but I don't need pictures or attention, he said quietly. However, if Mr. Harlan wishes to show appreciation, perhaps he could consider the night shift's request for working heaters in the break room and maybe a reliable coffee machine? The old one has been broken for months. Pearl Whitaker, who had been passing by, stopped to listen. Her eyes sparkled with approval. A practical suggestion, Marnie Cho added, emerging from her office. The chief legal officer's expression was calculating, and far less risky than a staged photo that could backfire. The night crew does essential work, Pearl noted pointedly. In the cold. With no coffee. Frank, when confronted with this united front, found himself cornered by practicality and principle. "Fine," he muttered. "Get the heaters installed today, and add a one-time bonus for the night shift, but that's it." By afternoon, an all-staff email announced the improvements and bonus. Alexei received numerous congratulatory messages from his co-workers, but he stayed focused on his duties, preparing for his night shift. That evening, at the church community center's weekly potluck, Pearl served Alexei a generous portion of chicken casserole. "You did good today," she said warmly, showed real grace under pressure. "Thank you," Alexei replied, settling at one of the folding tables. He pulled out his phone for his nightly call with Nadia. His daughter's face lit up the screen. "Papa, I saw you on the news." "Did you, Malishka?" He smiled, turning the phone to show her the newly installed break room heaters. "Look what we got today. No more cold nights at work." "That's good, Papa. You won't need extra socks anymore." "I'll be home by 9:30, he promised. "Don't forget your homework before bed." Nadia held up another paper crane, this one labeled Hope 2 in her careful handwriting. "For your pocket, Papa. For good luck." Alexei's heart swelled as he ended the call. He tucked the crane safely into his shirt pocket, next to its predecessor. Outside, a news van drove slowly past the community center windows, still chasing the story of the heroic janitor. The morning after the medical emergency, Marnie Cho strode through the HR department with purpose, her heels clicking against the tile floor. She'd called an emergency meeting with the department heads to address what she termed yesterday's cultural incident. "We need comprehensive sensitivity training," she announced to the gathered executives. "Not just a checkbox exercise, but real change." Her gaze swept the room, landing briefly on each face. "We'll fix culture with policy and example." Frank Harlan sat at the head of the conference table, nodding absently. His attention was clearly elsewhere, his fingers drumming against a thick folder labeled Gala Planning, Final Details. The corporate gala scheduled for that evening in his penthouse had consumed most of his focus. It was meant to be a showcase event, bringing together the company's most important stakeholders. After his shift ended, Alexei made his way home to the small apartment he shared with Nadia. The elevator in their building was perpetually out of order, so he climbed the 4 flights of stairs, his work shoes heavy on each step. The familiar sound of cartoons greeted him as he approached their door. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door always watched Nadia after school until he got home. Their apartment was modest but clean, with signs of life everywhere. The living room window stuck halfway up, letting in a cool breeze along with the distant sound of traffic. Nadia's crayons were scattered across the kitchen table, alongside her math homework and several half-finished paper cranes. The walls were decorated with her artwork, bright splashes of color that made the worn furniture seem less shabby. "Papa!" Nadia launched herself into his arms as soon as he entered. "I made another crane today, and I got an A on my spelling test." "That's wonderful, Maya Duragaya," Alexei said, hugging her tight. He thanked Mrs. Rodriguez as she gathered her things to leave. In the small kitchen, Alexei prepared their usual dinner of buckwheat porridge, adding a pat of butter and a sprinkle of sugar the way Nadia liked it. While it cooked, he helped her with her multiplication tables, watching proudly as she worked through each problem with determination. "This one's for courage," Nadia declared, holding up her newest paper crane. It was made from blue construction paper, carefully folded during art class. Alexei helped her tape it to the refrigerator, where it joined its siblings, AMP, a growing flock of hope and perseverance. Around lunchtime, a knock at the door revealed Pearl Whitaker, carrying a department store bag. "Found this at the church donation center," she said, pulling out a gently used winter coat in Nadia's size. "Still has plenty of wear in it." The coat was navy blue with silver buttons, and Nadia's eyes lit up when she saw it. "It's beautiful," she exclaimed, immediately trying it on. While Nadia paraded around the apartment in her new coat, Pearl turned to Alexei. "There's something else," she said. "The gala tonight needs extra cleaning crew, double pay for evening work. I put in a good word for you." Alexei hesitated, thinking of Nadia, but Pearl had already anticipated his concern. "Mrs. Rodriguez said she can stay late. You need the extra money, son." Later that afternoon, at the staffing office, Alexei met the rest of the evening crew, including Elena Reyes. She had the efficient movements of someone who'd worked in housekeeping for years, her hotel experience evident in the precise way she organized the cleaning supplies. Despite her professional demeanor, there was a shadow of worry in her dark eyes, and she checked her phone frequently between tasks. During their brief break, Elena mentioned her 5-year-old son, Matteo, showing Alexei a photo of a bright-eyed boy with his mother's smile. "He's with my sister tonight," she explained, her voice warm with maternal pride, but tinged with the familiar guilt of working parents who must be away from their children. As evening approached, the penthouse buzzed with pre-gala activity. Alexei and Elena worked alongside the other cleaning crew members, making sure every surface gleamed. The vacuum hummed across plush carpets, while caterers wheeled in trays of elegant hors d'oeuvres. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was beginning to sparkle as the sun set, office lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Elena was polishing a chrome fixture when her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen, and Alexei noticed her face pale slightly as she read the message. "We need to talk, F." Her hands trembled just slightly as she deleted the text, then returned to her work with renewed intensity, though her eyes had taken on a haunted quality. The gala was in full swing in Frank Harlan's penthouse, the space transformed by elegant lighting and flowing champagne. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, their music providing a sophisticated backdrop to the murmur of conversation. Board members clustered in small groups, wine glasses in hand, while Frank moved smoothly between donors, his practiced charm on full display. In a side hallway, away from the main festivities, Alexei and Elena worked efficiently to clean up a small spill, their movements practiced and unobtrusive. The marble floors gleamed under the subtle lighting, reflecting the careful attention of the cleaning staff. The elevator doors opened silently, and a small figure stepped out. Matteo, dressed in Superman pajamas, rubbed his sleepy eyes as he wandered from the staff room where he'd been waiting with a sitter who had stepped away briefly. His tiny feet padded across the polished floor as he made his way toward the sound of voices and music. Frank was mid-conversation with a potential investor when he felt a gentle tug on his suit jacket. He looked down to find a small boy staring up at him with familiar dark eyes. The child's next words dropped into a sudden lull in the music, carrying clearly across the now quiet room. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The trio's music faltered and stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft sound of Elena's horrified gasp as she rushed forward from the hallway. "Matteo." Elena scooped up her son, her face flushed with embarrassment and fear. She stood facing Frank, their shared history hanging heavy in the air between them. Years of carefully maintained distance crumbled in an instant. Everyone could see it now, the resemblance between Frank and the little boy, the way Elena couldn't quite meet Frank's eyes, the evidence of a past they'd tried to keep buried. Frank's face had gone rigid, his usual polish cracking to reveal something raw underneath. Those closest could see his hands trembling slightly as he set down his wine glass. The quiet support he'd provided over the years, the checks, the arrangements, the careful distance, all of it exposed in one innocent moment. A board member standing nearby, Charles Wilson, raised his eyebrows significantly at his colleague. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Frank's PR team materialized as if summoned, surrounding him with practiced efficiency. But before they could hustle him away, Marnie Cho stepped forward, her expression grave. She gripped Frank's arm firmly and spoke in a low, urgent tone. "Handle this with integrity, or it will handle you." The tension in the room was interrupted by the sharp buzz of Frank's phone. His assistant hurried over, whispering urgently, "Sir, it's Anya Baranova's office in Moscow." Frank took the call in his study, his face growing increasingly pale as he listened. The 340M partnership they'd been cultivating was already showing signs of strain, and now this, a demand that seemed designed to humble him further. "Let me understand," he said, his voice tight. "You want Alexei Morozov, our janitor, to serve as cultural liaison at a 10-day summit in Moscow, starting next Monday?" The answer was clear and non-negotiable. Without demonstrating genuine cultural humility, there would be no deal. Frank ended the call and stood at his window, watching the city lights blur as he considered his impossible position. He'd publicly mocked Alexei just days ago, and now, with whispers of his secret child spreading through the company's highest ranks, he was being asked to promote that same janitor to a key role. The gala wound down, guests departing with significant looks and barely concealed gossip. Elena had long since disappeared with Mateo, leaving behind a vacuum of questions and speculation. As the last of the catering staff cleared their equipment, Frank found Alexei by the service elevator, preparing to leave for the night. "Mr. Morozov." Frank's voice was strained, his usual authority undermined by the evening's events. "A moment." Alexei stood quietly, his dignified bearing a sharp contrast to Frank's barely contained tension. "There's a position," Frank said through gritted teeth. "Temporary cultural advisor. 10 days in Moscow, starting Monday. The deal needs," he paused, swallowing his pride with visible effort, "all your help." Alexei's expression remained carefully neutral, but his hands tightened slightly on his cleaning cart. "I would need to arrange care for my daughter," he said softly. "One night," Frank conceded. "Give me your answer in the morning." Alexei pulled out his phone and dialed Pearl's number. Her warm voice answered quickly, as if she'd been waiting for his call. "If God opens a door," Pearl said after hearing the situation, "walk through, then hold it for others." Alexei took a deep breath, looked Frank in the eye, and nodded. "Yes," he said simply. "I will help." The service elevator doors closed on his face, his expression a complex mixture of anxiety and determination as he descended into an uncertain future. As Wednesday morning dawned, Alexei sat at his small kitchen table, carefully writing in his neat teacher's handwriting. Nadia watched him from across the table, her cereal getting soggy as she studied his face. 10 days is not so long, Malishka," he said softly, looking up at her. "And we have good friends to help us." He laid out the schedule he'd spent half the night preparing. School as usual, then Pearl's after-school program at the community center until 5. Their neighbor, Mrs. Denton, a kind-faced widow who always smelled of lavender and cookie dough, would help in the evenings. "Mrs. Denton said you can do homework at her apartment," Alexei explained, reaching across to squeeze Nadia's hand. "She has that orange cat you like." Nadia nodded bravely, though her lower lip trembled slightly. "Will you call every day?" "Every single day," he promised, sliding the letter he'd written toward her. "And look, I wrote something special for you to practice while I'm gone." The letter contained 3 Russian words in careful script. "Spasibo," thank you, "chest," honor, and "mir," peace. Below each word, he'd written the English translation and a small note about when to use them. Nadia pulled out another paper crane, this one labeled "Bravery" in her crooked handwriting. "For your wallet, Papa," she said, "so you remember to be brave." Alexei tucked the crane carefully into his wallet, next to Pearl's medal and Nadia's school photo. Later that morning, in the stark fluorescent light of HR, Alexei signed a stack of papers while a representative explained his temporary title and the accompanying pay increase. The non-disclosure agreement came last, thick with legal language. Marnie Cho appeared in the doorway, her arms full of folders. "Ready for your crash course?" she asked, managing a small smile. "We've got 48 hours to turn you into a contract expert." They commandeered a small conference room, spreading documents across the table. Marnie walked him through the basics of international business contracts, Russian corporate customs, and proper etiquette for formal negotiations. "Remember," she said, tapping a document, "eye contact during toasts is crucial. Breaking it is considered deeply disrespectful." That evening, the community center's usual Wednesday potluck turned into an impromptu training session. The seniors, delighted to help, arranged chairs in a circle to practice toasting protocols. Pearl brought her famous chicken casserole, and Mrs. Denton contributed her signature snickerdoodles. Frank arrived, looking uncomfortable in his casual clothes, but the seniors' warmth slowly melted his rigid posture. They took turns raising glasses of sparkling cider, practicing the formal rhythms of Russian business toasts. "Spasibo," Frank attempted, his face serious with concentration. A slight smirk started to form, but he caught himself, remembering Pearl's sharp look from Monday morning. Alexei gently corrected his pronunciation. "Try again, spasibo." "From the heart." Frank tried once more, and this time something genuine crept into his voice. One of the seniors made a joke about how they should have used vodka instead of cider, and suddenly everyone was laughing, including Frank. His usual guard dropped for just a moment. During a quiet moment while others were serving themselves second helpings, Frank and Alexei found themselves alone at one end of the table. "I grew up in a coal town," Frank said unexpectedly, staring into his glass. "Father was a miner. I swore I'd never go down those mines." Alexei nodded, understanding the weight of that confession. "I was a language teacher in Russia," he offered in return. "After my wife passed, cancer very quick, I brought Nadia here." Started over. They sat in silence for a moment, the distance between janitor and CEO suddenly smaller. Thursday afternoon brought a flurry of final preparations. Visas arrived by courier, itineraries were printed, and Alexei received a borrowed winter coat from Pearl's veteran network. "Papa, it looks so warm," Nadia exclaimed during their video call, bouncing excitedly as he modeled the heavy coat, like a real businessman. Friday night found them on the overnight flight to Moscow, seated aisle to aisle in business class. The cabin lights dimmed as Frank practiced his opening statement one last time. "We come seeking not just a partnership, but a shared vision for worker dignity and cultural exchange," he recited quietly. "Almost perfect," Alexei murmured. "But say dostoinstvo работников instead. It carries more weight in Russian." Frank repeated the phrase carefully, then fell silent, watching as Alexei's fingers found Pearl's medal in his pocket. The janitor's lips moved in a silent prayer, his face peaceful despite the enormity of what lay ahead. Frank looked away, humbled by the quiet dignity of the man he had so recently mocked, and settled back in his seat as the plane carried them toward Moscow. The Moscow morning arrived in shades of steel, gray, the January air sharp enough to bite. Alexei and Frank stepped out of their taxi into the swirling snow, both fighting jet lag as they approached the gleaming office building that housed the Baranova Foundation. Anya's chief of staff, Viktor Petrov, met them in the marble lobby. His expression remained neutral as he extended his hand, watching carefully as both men moved to remove their gloves before shaking. The first test passed without prompting. "Welcome to Moscow," Viktor said in crisp English. "Please, follow me." In the executive conference room, a young woman silently served tea in delicate porcelain cups. Alexei noticed Frank watching him from the corner of his eye, mirroring his movements as he politely declined the first offer but accepted the second. Another cultural checkpoint cleared. "Mr. Morozov," Victor said in Russian, "please explain to Mr. Harlan why we begin with tea before business." Alexei translated smoothly, adding warmth to the formal words. "In Russia, we believe relationships must be watered like gardens before they can bear fruit." Frank nodded, cupping his hands around the warm tea. "Please tell Mr. Petrov I am grateful for this lesson in Russian hospitality." When Anya Baranova entered, the room shifted subtly, like iron filings aligning to a magnet. She took her seat at the head of the table, studying both men with sharp eyes. "Now," she said in Russian, "let us see what bridges we might build." The first day's negotiations stretched from morning until early evening. Anya raised pointed questions about worker conditions at vendor sites, her tone growing increasingly stern as she reviewed audit reports. "These numbers tell me about profits," she said, tapping the spreadsheet. "But where do I see the dignity of your workers?" As Alexei translated, he noticed Frank's shoulders tense. Before Frank could respond defensively, Alexei spoke up. "If I may suggest," he said carefully, "what if we created a worker wellness and apprenticeship program, something that specifically supports veterans and single parents?" Frank's eyebrows rose slightly, but he quickly followed Alexei's lead. "I would personally seed such a program," he added, leaning forward, "to demonstrate our commitment." Anya's expression softened marginally. "Interesting. Show me more tomorrow." That evening, Alexei sat on his hotel bed at exactly 8:30 p.m. Moscow time, 12:30 p.m. back home. Nadia's face filled his laptop screen, her smile bright as she held up the day's paper crane. "I labeled this one, Brave Heart," she said. "How many cranes now, Papa?" "Let's count together," he replied, his exhaustion melting away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, she finished. "Tell me today's joke." "What did the snow globe say to the weather forecast?" "What, Papa?" "I've got you surrounded." Her giggle was worth every minute of jet lag. The second day began with a tour of a tech incubator the foundation had funded. As they walked through the modern facility, Alexei greeted each staff member in Russian, translating their responses for Frank with careful attention to cultural context. In the cafeteria, an elderly worker approached Alexei hesitantly. "My hands," she said in Russian, holding them out. "The arthritis. Could you say a prayer?" Alexei glanced at Frank, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Gently taking the woman's gnarled hands in his, Alexei offered a simple blessing in Russian, asking for comfort and ease. Word spread quickly. A small line formed, a young programmer with anxiety, a cleaning woman worried about her son's upcoming exam, a security guard with back pain. Alexei gave each person a moment of genuine attention, offering brief prayers that bridged the gap between formal business and human need. Frank watched from nearby, his expression thoughtful. He saw how each person left standing a little straighter, as if Alexei's gentle words had lightened their invisible burdens. That evening, Anya caught Frank alone in the hotel corridor. Her usual businesslike demeanor had softened slightly. "Your man listens with his eyes," she said, studying Frank's face. "We could do great good together. Bring me a draft with that dignity clause tomorrow." After she left, Frank pulled out his phone and typed a message to Elena. "When I return, we talk in daylight. I won't hide again." For the first time since arriving in Moscow, when Frank lay down to sleep, his jaw wasn't clenched. The tension that had lived in his temples for so long began to ease, like ice finally starting to thaw. The morning light filtered through Moscow's winter haze as Anya's assistant arranged the term sheets on the polished conference table. The numbers stood bold on the page, 340M. Below that, carefully worded conditions about board ratification and the worker wellness apprenticeship charter. Alexei stood near the window, his hands clasped behind his back, watching snowflakes drift past. The weight of the moment settled on his shoulders, not just the money, but the chance to make real change for workers like himself. Frank adjusted his tie. a nervous gesture Alexei had come to recognize over their days together. "Ready?" Frank asked. Alexei nodded. "The ceremonial language is beautiful in Russian, very poetic." Anya entered, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. She took her seat at the head of the table, arranging her papers with precise movements. "Shall we begin?" Alexei's voice filled the room with the traditional Russian phrases of agreement and partnership. The words flowed like music, about trust, honor, and the dignity of shared purpose. He watched Frank lean forward slightly, clearly recognizing some of the words they'd practiced together. When he finished translating, Anya picked up her pen. The scratch of her signature seemed loud in the quiet room. She pushed the non-binding memorandum across the table, and Frank signed as well. "Tea," Anya announced, as her assistant wheeled in an ornate samovar. "We must toast our good work." They raised their cups, steam curling in the morning light. Anya spoke first, then nodded to Alexei to translate. "To bridges built with respect," he translated, "may they bear the weight of many crossings." Frank surprised them both by adding, in careful Russian, "Spasibo." "Thank you." His pronunciation wasn't perfect, but his sincerity was clear. After the tea, they gathered for photos. Frank stood straight-backed in his elegant suit, but his usual corporate mask had softened. He spoke to the company photographer with unusual warmth. "Make sure you get this right," Frank said. "This is important." Then, to everyone's surprise, he turned to face Alexei directly. "None of this would have happened without him. He built a bridge I never learned to cross." The photographer's camera clicked rapidly, capturing the moment. Alexei felt his face warm at the praise, but he held his head high. He thought of Nadia, of all the other children of night shift workers, of the opportunities this charter could create. Later, as the early winter darkness settled over Moscow, Frank and Alexei stood on the river embankment. Their breath fogged in the cold air as they waited for Nadia to answer their video call. Her face appeared, bright and eager. "Papa, Mr. Frank, look what I made!" She held up a paper crane, its wings delicately creased. Written in her careful handwriting was the word, "Hope." "Beautiful," Frank said, then attempted the Russian word, "Krasivaya." Nadia giggled. "You sound like a bear saying please." "But a nice bear." Frank's laugh echoed off the stone embankment, genuine and unguarded. Alexei joined in, feeling the last bits of tension between them dissolve in the frosty air. "Your papa taught me that word," Frank said to Nadia. "He's teaching me lots of things." They talked for a few more minutes before saying goodbye. Nadia blew kisses to both of them, and Alexei felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with his heavy coat. The peace lasted exactly 4 hours. At 2:47 a.m. Moscow time, Alexei's phone began buzzing with urgent messages. He fumbled for it in the dark hotel room, squinting at the screen. The first message was from Marnie. "Check your email, NOW. Crisis brewing." His inbox was flooded. At the top was a forwarded link to an online article with a grainy photo. His heart stopped when he saw it. The image showed him sitting at what appeared to be a cafe with Viktor Kravanov, a businessman on multiple international watch lists. Except Alexei had never met Kravanov. The man in the photo was Professor Dmitry Volkov, a retired literature teacher who'd given Alexei a reference for Nadia's school. Someone had digitally altered the image, matching the lighting and angles to make it seem like a clandestine meeting. His hands shaking slightly, Alexei opened an email from HR. The words blurred before his eyes. "Suspended pending investigation, serious allegations. Remain in Moscow until further notice." Then came the ICE notification about his immigration status being under review. His breath caught in his throat as he read about an anonymous tip to child services questioning Nadia's safety. Pearl had already left 3 voicemails. He played the first one. "Son, we'll fight this. Stay strong. I'm with Nadia right now. She's safe, I promise." The final blow arrived in a terse message from Anya's office. All negotiations frozen until this matter is resolved. Ms. Baranova says, "Stand for your man in the light, or we build nothing." Alexei sank onto the bed, his legs no longer able to support him. The room seemed to spin slightly as the weight of it all pressed down on his chest. He couldn't draw a full breath. Everything they'd built over the past week, the trust, the hope, the future opportunities for workers, seemed to crumble like sand between his fingers. His phone buzzed again. Through blurred vision, he saw Nadia's contact photo, her bright smile, a paper crane held up to her cheek. He couldn't answer. Not yet. Not until he could speak without his voice shaking. The fluorescent lights of Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport buzzed overhead as Frank paced near the airline counter, his phone pressed to his ear. Alexei sat quietly in a nearby chair, his hands folded in his lap, watching the snow fall outside the terminal windows. "No statements until we're back," Frank barked into his phone. "Yes, I understand the optics. No, I won't just book the flights." He ended the call and ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Marnie's voice crackled through on speakerphone. "We need facts, not silence. That photo's clearly doctored. We can prove later." Frank cut her off, dropping heavily into the seat next to Alexei. "First, we get home." Alexei nodded and pulled out his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen before he pressed record. "Nadia, my sweet girl, I am coming home. Be brave. Pearl will make you pancakes." He paused, swallowed hard, then added softly in Russian, "I love you more than stars." The flight board flashed, "Moscow to New York, 3:45 a.m. departure." They moved through security in silence, their footsteps echoing in the nearly empty terminal. Gate A7, 3:15 a.m. An elderly cleaning woman noticed Alexei's drawn face and pressed a small package of cookies into his hand, murmuring something in Russian. He thanked her quietly, sharing half with Frank. New York, JFK Airport, 6:20 a.m. EST. They sprinted through customs, Frank's usual composure cracking as they barely made their connection. A flight attendant, seeing their stress, upgraded them to business class without being asked. Gate 12, 7:05 a.m. Alexei dozed fitfully while Frank stared at his phone, deleting message after message from PR teams and board members. One text from Elena remained unread. Home airport, 9:45 a.m. Thursday. Gray morning light filtered through high windows as they collected their bags. No reporters waited. Someone had leaked the wrong arrival time. Frank hesitated, then pressed his business card into Alexei's hand. "Call if you need anything." "I mean it." Alexei's small house, 2:15 p.m. The ICE agent's black SUV looked out of place on the modest street. Inside, Pearl had mobilized an army of support. Mrs. Denton from next door arranged cookies on a plate, while 3 ladies from church fussed over a pot of hot cocoa. Agents Thompson and Rivera. Pearl greeted them at the door, her military bearing evident. "Please, come in from the cold." Nadia sat at the kitchen table, her homework spread out neatly. She looked up as the agents entered, her small face serious but unafraid. "Would you like to see my chore chart?" she asked politely. "Papa helps me check it every night when he gets home from work." Agent Rivera smiled despite herself. "Yes, we'd like that." Nadia led them to the refrigerator, where a colorful chart hung next to her latest report card, all A's and 1B+. Paper cranes perched along the top of the fridge, each labeled with a word: hope, courage, peace. "These are beautiful," Agent Thompson commented, accepting a mug of cocoa from Mrs. Denton. "Did you make them?" "Papa taught me. He says folding cranes helps you think good thoughts." The church ladies produced character references, school records, and even Alexei's volunteer schedule at the community center. Pearl quietly mentioned her military service and current role as building chaplain. "Mr. Morozov has been nothing but an asset to our community," she stated firmly. The agents took notes, asked standard questions, and studied the obviously well-cared-for home. After an hour, they stood to leave. "We'll be in touch," Agent Rivera said, her tone softer than when they'd arrived. "But everything appears to be in order." Across town, Frank sat in his darkened office, ignoring calls and staring at Elena's text. "Mateo keeps asking about you." Shame churned in his stomach. His PR team had drafted careful statements. "Mr. Harlan maintains full confidence in the vetting process. Regrets any misunderstanding. Focused on moving forward." He'd signed them, but couldn't make himself speak the words to waiting cameras. The practiced corporate phrases felt like ashes in his mouth. That evening, the empty church sanctuary offered Alexei its quiet embrace. Streetlights filtered through stained glass, painting gentle bars of color across the wooden pews. He knelt in the back row, Pearl's St. Michael medal cool against his palm. The familiar words of Psalm 23 came softly in Russian, a prayer and a comfort. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." His fingers found Nadia's paper crane in his coat pocket, the one marked bravery. He held it carefully, remembering her small hands folding the crisp paper. The truth would need to come in daylight, all of it. No more shadows, no more fear. Alexei rose from the pew, his decision made. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. He stepped into the dark church aisle, ready to face whatever came next. The grand ballroom of Harlan Dynamics hummed with tension as hundreds of employees filled every seat. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the gathered crowd. Pearl Whitaker stood at the podium, her silver hair gleaming, her bearing as straight as it had been in her army days. "Let us begin with a moment of stillness," she said, her voice carrying to the furthest corner. "In times of challenge, we remember that truth comes before titles, and courage before comfort." The room fell silent. In the front row, Frank Harlan shifted in his chair, his usual polished demeanor showing cracks. Alexei sat 3 seats away, hands folded quietly in his lap. Pearl's eyes found Frank's. "Before we hear from our CEO, there's something that needs to happen." She stepped back from the podium. "Mr. Harlan, I believe you have words that should be spoken face to face, not through a microphone." A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Frank stood slowly, his expensive suit unable to hide the weight of the moment. He turned to face Alexei, who rose to meet him. Frank's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and started again, this time without the practiced smoothness of his corporate persona. "Alexei, I mocked you that morning in the lobby. I reduced you to a joke because of your language, your work, your difference from me. I was wrong. Not just wrong in action, but wrong in heart." Alexei's gentle eyes held Frank's gaze steadily. "You showed me what real dignity looks like," Frank continued, his words growing stronger with honesty. "Not in grand gestures, but in how you treated everyone, from the board members who looked down on you to the cafeteria workers in Moscow who asked for your blessing. I am deeply sorry." A tear slipped down Frank's cheek, catching everyone by surprise. He wiped it away without shame. Alexei extended his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Harlan." They shook hands, and something in the room shifted. But Frank wasn't finished. He turned to face the crowd, then looked toward the center aisle where Elena stood, her hands trembling slightly. "There's more truth that needs daylight," Frank said. His voice carried clearly through the hushed room. 5 years ago, I made choices that affected not just my life, but the lives of others. Elena Reyes and I had a relationship. We have a son, Mateo." Gasps and whispers erupted, then quickly died down as Frank continued. "I supported them financially but kept them hidden. I chose my reputation over my responsibility as a father. I chose shame over love." He looked directly at Elena. "I am sorry for every moment Mateo had to wonder why his father wouldn't acknowledge him. I am sorry for asking you to carry that burden alone. I ask your forgiveness, and I promise, publicly, to do better. Full child support transparency, and more importantly, presence in his life, if you'll allow it." Elena's eyes shone with tears, but she stood tall, nodding once. Frank turned back to the crowd. This company talks about family values. Today, we're going to prove what that means. He gestured to Marnie, who stepped forward with a tablet. I'm announcing the immediate creation of our family dignity policy and a legal aid, immigration support fund for hourly workers and immigrants. I'm seeding it with $10 million of my personal stock, and the board has agreed to match it. The ballroom erupted. Applause thundered as people rose to their feet. A few voices of criticism tried to rise but were drowned in the wave of support. In the second row, Pearl dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Marnie took the podium next, her usual pragmatic demeanor charged with purpose. Regarding the alleged Moscow Cafe incident, we've completed our forensic analysis. She pulled up a timeline on the large screen. The photo was doctored. We have proof of Mr. Morozov's actual location at the time, verified by hotel security cameras and multiple witnesses. We will release names of those responsible for this smear attempt within 24 hours. The crowd murmured as the evidence appeared on screen. Timestamps, original photos, technical analysis proving manipulation. Later, as people spilled out onto the plaza under the afternoon sun, phones buzzed simultaneously in Frank's and Alexei's pockets. Anya's message glowed on their screens. Courage is contagious. Unfreeze talks when the man is cleared. Alexei found Pearl standing quietly near a planter of late summer flowers. He hugged her, this woman who had become like a mother to him and a grandmother to Nadia. The Lord walks in the open, Pearl whispered in his ear. Camera crews swarmed forward, microphones thrust toward Alexei's face. Questions overlapped. Mr. Morozov, what's your response? How do you feel? What happens next? Alexei raised his hand gently, and the clamor subsided. He spoke just one sentence. Dignity is a common language. Then he smiled, politely excused himself, and walked away from the cameras. He had a dinner date with Nadia, soup and cartoons waiting at home, their own quiet celebration of truth in the light. Saturday morning light filtered through the windows of Marnie Cho's office as she nursed her third cup of coffee. Spreadsheets and email chains filled her dual monitors, each telling a piece of the puzzle she'd been assembling since dawn. "Got you," she muttered, highlighting a series of suspicious payments. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, documenting the trail that led from an offshore account through 3 shell companies and finally to a consulting firm specializing in reputation management. She picked up her phone and dialed IT. "Dave? I need those server logs we discussed." "Yes, specifically for Greg Lidell's workstation between Tuesday and Wednesday night." She paused, listening. "Perfect. Send them directly to my secure folder." The evidence mounted with each passing hour. Greg Lidell, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives, had accessed old company photos from the press archive late Tuesday night. The files had been transferred to an external drive, then emailed to Brand Shield Consulting using his personal Gmail account. Marnie methodically built her case file: timestamps, IP addresses, payment records, email chains. The photo manipulation was amateur work. Rushing makes people sloppy. Brandshield's expert had simply superimposed Alexei's face onto an old photo of a known oligarch at a Moscow cafe. Her office phone buzzed. "Ms. Cho? Corporate Security is here with Detective Martinez. Send them in." Detective Martinez, a compact woman with sharp eyes, reviewed the evidence while the head of Corporate Security, Jim Barnes, stood by the window. "The money trail is clean," Martinez said, nodding at the spreadsheets. "Combined with the digital forensics, it's enough for fraud charges if the company wants to pursue them." "We do," Marnie confirmed. She pressed her intercom. "Please have HR prepare Mr. Lidell's suspension paperwork. And get me outside counsel on the line. We need to serve Brand Shield immediately." By noon, the machinery of justice was in full motion. Greg Lidell was escorted from the building, his face ashen as security collected his badges and devices. Across town, a process server handed Brandshield's CEO a thick envelope of legal documents. Marnie drafted the public correction with surgical precision. Following a thorough investigation, Harlan Dynamics has identified the source of falsified photos concerning Mr. Alexei Morozov. The responsible parties have been suspended and will face appropriate legal consequences. We reaffirm our complete confidence in Mr. Morozov's character and integrity. Her phone chimed with an email from ICE. Case closed. No further action required. Minutes later, Child Services followed with their report. Home visit reveals stable, nurturing environment, strong community support network, no concerns noted. Case resolved with positive assessment. Marnie allowed herself a small smile as she forwarded both messages to Alexei. Then she turned to her next task, preparing the board presentation that would cement the company's new direction. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows when Frank Harlan pulled up to Elena's modest house. He carried a bouquet of late summer flowers from the community garden, Pearl's suggestion, and a leather folder containing carefully prepared legal documents. Elena opened the door before he could knock. She wore a simple blue dress, her posture guarded but not hostile. "Thank you for seeing me," Frank said, offering the flowers. They moved to the front stoop by mutual, unspoken agreement. Let the neighbors see, let them witness respect replacing shame. "These papers," Frank began, opening the folder on his knee, "they're about making things right. Joint custody arrangements, if you're willing. A trust fund for Mateo's education and future." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not trying to buy forgiveness. I'm trying to give him the security he deserves and the father he should have had all along." Through the front window's lace curtains, Mateo's small face appeared. Grinning, Elena's expression softened slightly. "He asks about you," she said quietly. "Every day since the gala. I'd like to answer his questions myself," Frank replied. "All of them. No more hiding." They went through the papers methodically. Elena asked sharp, thoughtful questions. Frank answered, without evasion. When they finished, the shadows had grown longer, and the neighbors had seen enough to fuel a week of gossip, all of it showing Frank Harlan choosing to sit on a working mother's front stoop, treating her with respect. Evening settled over the city as Frank made one final stop, carrying bags of takeout from Kiev Garden, the Russian deli Pearl had recommended. The aroma of authentic borscht filled the hallway of Alexei's apartment building. Alexei welcomed him in, and Frank noted how the small space felt warm with life, Nadia's schoolbooks on the table, origami cranes hanging from strings across the window, Pearl knitting in the corner armchair. "Updates," Frank said, setting out the food. Marnie found the truth. Greg Lydell and a consulting firm doctored the photo. They're both facing consequences. He ladled borscht into bowls as he continued. ICE closed their inquiry. Child Services gave you flying colors. Nadia set up her tablet for a video call with Mateo, showing him her collection of paper cranes while the adults talked. The children's laughter provided a gentle counterpoint to the serious conversation. Anya texted, Frank said, watching Alexei's reaction carefully. "She wants us both back in Moscow to sign the final agreements." Alexei's eyes went to Nadia, concern flickering across his face. Pearl set down her knitting. "We can braid the days," she said firmly. "Go, both of you. We'll keep her rhythm here." Relief and gratitude mingled in Alexei's expression as he nodded. Monday morning arrived with a crisp autumn chill. Pearl helped Nadia zip up her bright blue jacket as Mrs. Denton's weathered station wagon idled in front of the apartment building. "Remember, sweetheart, straight to my place after school," Pearl said, adjusting Nadia's backpack straps. "We'll make those special blueberry pancakes you love while you tackle that math homework." "With extra syrup?" Nadia asked hopefully. "Just a little extra," Pearl winked, buckling her safely into the back seat. "Your papa will call tonight from Moscow, same time as always." At the airport across town, Frank and Alexei cleared security and found their gate for the first leg to New York. Frank noticed how Alexei kept one hand in his pocket, likely holding Pearl's medal and Nadia's latest paper crane. Gate B-17 for Moscow connects through Terminal C, Frank said, checking their itinerary. We have a 90-minute layover at JFK. Alexei nodded, his expression thoughtful as they settled into their seats. The plane lifted through clouds stained pink by sunrise. During the short flight to New York, they reviewed their presentation materials one final time. At JFK, they made their way to Terminal C. Alexei paused at the small interfaith chapel near Gate C4, stepping inside for a moment of quiet prayer. Frank waited respectfully outside, watching travelers rush past with their rolling suitcases and coffee cups. When Alexei emerged, his face was peaceful. "Ready?" he said simply. The long flight to Moscow passed in alternating work and rest. They landed Tuesday morning as heavy snow began to fall, turning the city into a white dreamscape. A sleek company car delivered them to the same boardroom where everything had unraveled just days ago. Anya Baranova greeted them with genuine warmth, clasping their hands firmly. "Welcome back, gentlemen. You have shown what it means to stand in truth." They gathered around the polished conference table, where a large screen showed Marnie's face via secure video link. She had dark circles under her eyes but looked satisfied as she shared her screen, displaying the final Worker Wellness Apprenticeship Charter. The language prioritizes veterans' families for the first round of scholarships, Marnie explained, scrolling through the document. 20% of annual profits will fund continuing education for hourly workers with special consideration for single parents. Anya nodded approvingly as they worked through each section. By early afternoon, the charter was ready. Press photographers filed in quietly, setting up their equipment as translators took their positions. Alexei stood to deliver the ceremonial blessing, his voice clear and strong first in Russian, then English. "May this agreement honor the dignity of all who labor, and may it build bridges of understanding between our peoples." The cameras clicked softly as Frank stepped forward to sign. He paused, glancing at his phone, where Elena had just connected a video call. Mateo's excited face filled the screen, the boy sitting at Elena's kitchen table with a glass of milk and cookies. "Would you like to help me with something very important?" Frank asked his son. Mateo nodded eagerly. "When I come home next week, we're having a special celebration at the community center," Frank explained. "I'd like you to help me press the ceremonial stamp on these papers then. Would that be okay? Like a real businessman?" Mateo's eyes widened. "Exactly like that," Frank smiled. "We'll do it together." Anya leaned into view of Mateo's screen. "We will save a special commemorative page just for you and your father to stamp next week," she promised. "It will hang in both our offices." Frank signed the documents with steady hands while Mateo watched. The others followed. Anya, her board members, the witnesses, implementation schedules were confirmed, wire transfer protocols established. $340 million would begin flowing between accounts within 24 hours. As evening fell, Frank and Alexei stood on the snow-dusted embankment of the Moscow River. The city lights reflected off the dark water, and their breath frosted in the cold air. "You know," Frank said quietly, "this deal closed because you opened my eyes. Opened my heart, really." Alexei shook his head modestly. "God opens hearts," he replied. "I was just fortunate to be there when it happened." He offered a brief, grateful prayer in Russian. Frank pulled out his phone. "Here, let's send a picture to the kids before we head back to pack." They stood shoulder to shoulder against the twilight cityscape, two fathers who had learned to see clearly. Frank snapped the selfie and sent it to Elena and Pearl with the caption, "Heading home tomorrow. Deal done, lessons learned." 6 months had transformed the Harlan Dynamics headquarters. Sunlight streamed through the atrium windows, illuminating crisp banners that proclaimed "Worker to Manager Cohort 1" in bold letters. The space hummed with anticipation as families filled the rows of chairs. Alexei Morozov stood at the edge of the stage, adjusting his tie with careful fingers. The title, Director of Cultural Partnerships, still felt new on his business cards, but the responsibility settled naturally on his shoulders. Down the hall, a newly installed bronze plaque caught the morning light. Pearl Whitaker Community Health Clinic, a testament to the retired nurse's decades of service. At a table near the entrance, Elena Reyes arranged family resource pamphlets and program applications. Her confident smile reflected her new role as head of the Family Resource Council. She glanced occasionally at the front row where Frank sat between their children. Nadia and Mateo hunched over a shared coloring book, trading crayons back and forth with the easy friendship of siblings. A large display screen cycled through the wellness apprenticeship program's achievements. 53 veterans hired, 38 night shift scholarships awarded, 15 single parents enrolled in management training. Each number represented a story, a bridge built, a dignity restored. As the crowd settled, Alexei approached the podium. His voice carried clearly through the space, measured and warm. "When I first came to America," he began, "I thought I had to leave my language at the border. That speaking Russian meant staying invisible." He paused, making eye contact with elderly couples and young families alike. "But every language is a bridge. Even silence can carry us if we hold it together." Heads nodded throughout the audience. An older janitor wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. "Today we celebrate 25 graduates who crossed their own bridges," Alexei continued. "They taught me that dignity speaks in many voices, in the quiet 3 a.m., mopping of floors, in the careful folding of clean sheets, in the steady hand that serves coffee to strangers." Pearl sat in the front row, her spine straight despite her years, beaming at each graduate like a proud mother. Marnie Cho took the podium next, her usual businesslike manner softened by the occasion. "As part of our commitment to transparency," she said, "I want to share that Greg Lydell has submitted his resignation. The legal settlement with the consulting firm that attempted to discredit our program will fund 10 additional scholarships next year." She kept it brief and factual, focusing on the future rather than past wrongs. Frank stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Before we present the diplomas, I'd like to ask my son Mateo to help me with something special." He held out his hand toward the front row. Mateo looked up at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. The boy walked to the stage, his small dress shoes clicking on the steps. Frank lifted him to see the podium, where a framed copy of the Worker Wellness Apprenticeship Charter lay waiting. "Would you help me make this official?" Frank asked, showing Mateo the ceremonial stamp. Together, their hands pressed down. The satisfying thunk drew warm applause from the crowd. Mateo's face glowed with pride as he hugged his father's legs. After the diplomas were distributed, Alexei found Pearl near the refreshment table. He reached into his pocket and withdrew her St. Michael medal. "This carried me through dark times," he said softly. "It lived where it needed to." Pearl closed his fingers back around the medal. "Then keep it for the next door you open," she insisted. "There's always another bridge to build." The late afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, turning the air golden. Nadia approached her father, holding her final paper crane with careful hands. "This one's different," she explained. "It's for everyone." Alexei led her to the stage where a shallow bowl of water sat surrounded by tea lights. With gentle fingers, Nadia placed her crane on the water's surface. It bobbed once, then found its balance, floating serenely in the circle of small flames. Its shadow danced on the bottom of the bowl, small, brave, and steady. Around the stage, people began joining hands. Frank's fingers found Elena's. Mateo squeezed between them. Pearl clasped hands with Marnie and a graduating grandmother who cleaned the executive floor. The new managers linked arms with their former crew members. The room filled with a tapestry of voices, laughter as someone told a joke in Spanish, a quiet prayer in Russian, the soft whisper of paper wings spinning slowly in the bowl of light. Something new had taken root in the building's marble halls. A stability built on dignity made policy, family drawn into the light, and hope woven into the fabric of each ordinary day. If you enjoyed the story, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.